Palace. The helicopters, all the security overhead, and being driven down the Mall to Downing Street, and I will hand you back to our teams there.
Jane, thank you. Well, the scene here in Downing Street couldn't be more different to that scene of real solemnity, of real formality, that picture with the King, Sir Kier Starmer and his wife, Lady Victoria, coming out, grinning away, broad beams as they get into their official car. But here in Downing Street, the lectern is now out. You can see it there. The lectern came out and a cheer came up from the Labour activists who've been gathering here. And frankly, a Labour scriptwriter could hardly have dreamt of this. It was raining and drizzly this morning. Now Kier Starmer has become the Prime Minister and is on his way to Downing Street. The sun has come out. And in a sense, despite Kier Starmer's often sober demeanour as a politician, as you were discussing with Tom Baldwin, the dramatic turnaround that he has been able to achieve as Labour leader is really the stuff of some kind of political legend. It was not what the vast majority of people in the Labour movement and the Labour Party thought was possible in 2019. Indeed, some people warned that the Labour Party could be out forever. There were even on the margins some discussions about whether or not the party should disband. And yet here, British voters haven't been shown themselves willing to change their mind in large number. And Kier Starmer is not far now from making the short journey from his official car. We expect him to walk up Downing Street and greet some of the people who have helped him in the campaign, who've worked so hard behind the scenes. Some of them I've spotted in the crowd who've worked with him for so long. And no doubt as he makes the short journey up the street before addressing the country at the lectern, he will want to shake hands, perhaps embrace a few of them, give them a word, give them a smile, and no doubt give them a thank you. And we can see the cars turning there as they get ever closer to Downing Street. So Kier Starmer making this short journey, one that not so long ago he might hardly have dared dream was possible. We can now hear in Downing Street here, the helicopter overhead. You can see there Lady Victoria get out of the car in her red dress. Kier Starmer get out of the car on the other side, and they have not stopped at the end of Downing Street, so that they've got out slightly around the corner in Whitehall. That suggests that they are going to come into Downing Street here on foot, creating, as we suggested, a very different image. He's not going to sweep up the street in that prime ministerial Jaguar, that armoured car. It looks like they are being squirreled away through one of Whitehall's many exclusive tunnels and corridors, genuinely the corridors of power. And he will then emerge here in Downing Street. You can see that's just round the back of the glorious Horse Guards parade here, right in the heart of Whitehall, where governments over the centuries have wielded such power and influence. That centre of political power, which now belongs to Kier Starmer and the Labour Party. It's likely here in Downing Street when he speaks to the country, he will strike a very serious tone about the job ahead. But I think since the victory became clear in the early hours of the morning, in fact being confirmed by Rishi Sunak, who was the first person to say out loud before we'd passed the magic marker for Labour of 326 seats, giving them a majority. Ironically, it was Rishi Sunak who was the first to say Labour has won this general election. He revealed before 5 a.m. that he'd already called Sir Kier Starmer to congratulate him when Labour technically was still short of that majority. But some 8 or so hours later, Kier Starmer is now here and is just moments away from making a historic walk up Downing Street. And without question, after the formality of all of those pictures at Buckingham Palace, I'm sure he will be greeted with rapturous cheers by his supporters, friends, and some close parliamentary allies who will greet him here. And the chant they've been giving here, while practicing waving their flags, is Kier there and everywhere. That's what they've been saying. So rather different to the kind of tourist crowds we saw outside Buckingham Palace. They've been practicing that chant. There they are, clutching not just Union Jacks, but look at that, saltires and the Welsh flag too. There will be no accident about that, no accident whatsoever. because Labour has picked up seats in Wales. They've done extremely well in Scotland, and that has all been part of adding up Kier Starmer's majority safely over 400 seats, which will give him, as this day moves towards the afternoon, his first afternoon in power, an enormous majority and enormous political power.
The new Prime Minister's sweep. We used to sing the new Prime Minister's sweep in through the gates of Downing Street. Where do we now think that Sir Kier Starmer is going to arrive from?
Well, Sophie, it's a bit of a guessing game. I was trying to identify from the air. I know this neck of the woods pretty well, but I think he went into one of the courtyards just off Horse Guards Parade, which means he's somewhere off to the right of the historic shiny door, but there are all sorts of warrens and ways through. So I think that he will probably pop out at the end of some of the Cabinet Office buildings down at the Whitehall end of Downing Street, but through a secure way around, rather than actually having to walk up Whitehall past members of the public. Security, of course, for Kier Starmer has been tight as leader of the opposition, but now as Prime Minister, as the leader of the sixth biggest economy in the world, as the leader of a country that has a significant military and security role around the world, security for him will go through the roof now. So he's not going to be wandering up Whitehall through members of the public, I wouldn't expect. I think he'll probably pop out through some part of Whitehall at the end of Downing Street and then walk up the street. I don't think past his crowds of supporters who've gathered here in the sun. But we'll have to see. Maybe he'll pop out surprisingly from the other end. I don't know. I am guessing based on my decent knowledge of this neck of the woods, but I've been trying to identify buildings from the air. So, yeah, I hope I'm right. And he's not suddenly going to pop out the door behind us, but I can't imagine he'll do that.
This is all about setting a different tone, though, isn't it?
Yeah, without question. I mean, it's interesting. You were talking to Alistair Campbell earlier, and he was saying, well, I don't think he'll do the big sort of celebratory thing. But I think actually for this moment, after the formality of the palace, I think when you think about the superhuman efforts that actually campaigners and activists and politicians in all political parties put in during campaigns, particularly in this context, I think the idea that they weren't going to allow themselves just a few moments of flag waving and baby kissing and greeting and congratulation and celebration from Kier Starmer's close supporters and aides. I think the idea they weren't going to indulge in a little bit of that was probably for the birds. However, I think he will strike a pretty businesslike tone in his speech, offering, as he did in the early hours of this morning, around about 5 o'clock, speaking the Tate Modern. He did talk about sunlight of hope returning to the UK. He did talk about returning that sense of promise that people's children would always do better than them. The return of that social contract between generations that he says has been somewhat stretched and strained after 14 years of Conservative governments. So he will be trying to offer a dash of hope as well. But at one point during the campaign, which was such a Kier Starmer statement, he said he offered frank hope. Now, that wasn't a man called Frank Hope, but a frank hope, a sense of, I'm Kier Starmer, I'm not going to promise you some kind of nirvana overnight. He's trying, and I think we'll hear this in a few moments, he's been trying to say it all the way through this campaign, a commitment that under his leadership, Britain can be a better place, but a warning to the country that it may well take some time. But it will be interesting, Sophie and John. I do think in the next couple of weeks that we are likely to hear from senior Labour politicians, those new members of the cabinet we expect to be seeing coming up in Downing Street later today. I do expect they're going to try and shift some of the story they're telling the public to include a sense that things might be even worse than they had expected. I think they might try to set some kind of ground zero. But at this moment, the sun shining on Downing Street, where the sun doesn't often shine, it has to be said. It's a slightly strange microclimate here in Downing Street. But as we just show you again, that formal picture of the King greeting the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, his supporters here in Downing Street are standing in the sun, broad smiles everywhere to be seen, lining up along the street. And I do expect that they will all be ready to make the most of every single second as their leader, the leader of the Labour Party, who couldn't have dreamt of this moment in 2019, is about to arrive. But I'm still guessing where he's actually going to pop out in Downing Street. So I keep looking up the street and then down the street, but we'll shout as soon as we see him.
Look up, Laura. Maybe he's about to parachute down. Who knows? I mean, so Kier Starmer, he took
That would be
during
Ed
the
Davey,
campaign.
John. That would be Ed Davey on a bungee.
That's right. So Kier Starmer talked during the campaign, didn't he, about growing up in a working class family in a Pebble Dash semi in Surrey. And here he is about to arrive at one of the most famous addresses in the world at number 10. There we go. We can see Lady Victoria there in the red dress and Kier getting in on the other side of the car. We understand that they got out of the car, round the back of Downing Street. I think that might be the Treasury. They're now getting back into the car and they're going to head around the front. So, Laura, it looks like they will be making the traditional entrance through the gates, but they obviously had a pit stop along the way.
So no secret tunnels being required to lead to some kind of surprise entrance, but perhaps they were just making a pit stop, perhaps just having a private moment together before one enormous moment, just after one other moment. I wonder perhaps if they were saying to each other things that they had been thinking of saying for a very, very long time, a private moment together. Perhaps they were there to see their children, to acknowledge their importance to each other as a family at this enormous moment for them. We don't know what happened just behind closed doors, but they are now back in the car, and they are literally around the corner from here, John. So who knows what they were up to in that moment as they come back onto Whitehall. They're just turning back onto Whitehall, and they are quite literally round the corner from Downing Street now. A journey that for the Labour Party has felt for so long, so far, and so impossible, has now almost come to an end, with the Labour Prime Minister, for the first time, walking into Downing Street for the first time in so many years. Certainly will. You can hear the cheer going up from his supporters here waiting for him in Downing Street. The gates are open at the end of the street, causing a cheer to go up. Here come the Outriders. They'll flank him everywhere he goes now. As the 58th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom arrives in Downing Street in that role for the first time. Kier Starmer there thanking and greeting his supporters, a beaming smile as he shakes hands with those who have supported him for so long. That was just Pat McFadden, who's been the chief of this campaign, shaking his hand. Kier Starmer looking elated. That is an image of the Labour leader we have so rarely seen in public. Hugs, smiles, cheers, and handshakes. As he crosses over the famous street with his wife, Vic, as he often refers to her, making his way across that line of supporters. A hug there from his longtime aide. such is the desire of his supporters, friends, to greet him as he makes along the line that it's taking him quite a long time to get to the lectern. They're enjoying every moment of this. And time for the waiting cameras in a second. But first, the final thank yous to friends, activists, and campaigners, those people who've worked alongside Kier Starmer and his wife so hard and for so long. And here he comes up to the lectern, only the 7th ever Labour Prime Minister.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. His achievement as the first British Asian Prime Minister of our country, the extra effort that will have required, should not be underestimated by anyone. And we pay tribute to that today. And we also recognise the dedication and hard work he brought to his leadership. But now our country has voted decisively for change, for national renewal, and a return of politics to public service. When the gap between the sacrifices made by people and the service they receive from politicians grows this big, it leads to a weariness in the heart of a nation, a draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief in a better future, that we need to move forward together. Now, this wound, this lack of trust, can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that. But we can make a start today with the simple acknowledgement that public service is a privilege and that your government should treat every single person in this country with respect. If you voted Labour yesterday, we will carry the responsibility of your trust as we rebuild our country. But whether you voted Labour or not, in fact, especially if you did not, I say to you directly, my government will serve you. Politics can be a force for good. We will show that. We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and that is how we will govern. Country first, party second. Yet, if I'm honest, service is merely a precondition of hope, and it is surely clear to everyone that our country needs a bigger reset, a rediscovery of who we are, because no matter how fierce the storms of history, one of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate a way to calmer waters. And yet this depends upon politicians, particularly those who stand for stability and moderation, as I do, recognising when we must change course. For too long now, we've turned a blind eye as millions slid into greater insecurity. Nurses, builders, drivers, carers, people doing the right thing, working harder every day, recognised at moments like this before, yet as soon as the cameras stop rolling, their lives are ignored. I want to say very clearly to those people, not this time. Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. The world is now a more volatile place. This will take a while. But have no doubt that the work of change begins immediately. Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain with wealth created in every community. Our NHS back on its feet facing the future. Secure borders, safer streets, everyone treated with dignity and respect at work. The opportunity of clean British power, cutting your energy bills for good. And brick by brick, we will rebuild the infrastructure of opportunity, the world-class schools and colleges, the affordable homes that I know are the ingredients of hope for working people, the security that working class families like mine can build their lives around. Because if I asked you now whether you believe that Britain will be better for your children, I know too many of you would say no. And so my government will fight every day until you believe again. From now on, you have a government unburdened by doctrine, guided only by the determination to serve your interest, to defy, quietly, those who have written our country off. You have given us a clear mandate, and we will use it to deliver change, to restore service and respect to politics, end the era of noisy performance, tread more lightly on your lives, and unite our country. 4 nations standing together again, facing down, as we have so often in our past, the challenges of an insecure world, committed to a calm and patient rebuilding. So, with respect and humility, I invite you all to join this government of service in the mission of national renewal. Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
Kier Starmer inviting the country to join him in his government of service. An embrace there for Carolyn Harris, one of his close MP colleagues, as he says thank you and embraces more of his supporters who have gathered here in Downing Street, who have listened with the country to Kier Starmer's first speech to the nation as Prime Minister. Joining hands once more with his wife Victoria, greeting a family friend there. And perhaps her father will check that and get back to you. But clearly huge scenes of emotion here in Downing Street for Kier Starmer and his family. A man who has become our nation's Prime Minister, who not so long ago
Kier Starmer, entry number 10. About to. Step is fast too. And the famous number 10 accommodation.
And there we are, a historic image. Labour's 7th Prime Minister, Sir Kier Starmer. The first Downing Street wave. And we'll stay on these pictures as Kier Starmer, having made history, walks through the famous door into the entrance hall of Downing Street, being greeted there by the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Simon Case, who served Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, of course, being clapped in, as is traditional, by the civil servants who will now work on his agenda. Outside, almost the carnival atmosphere among Labour supporters and activists who came here to Downing Street to watch it, and to watch Kier Starmer address the nation for the first time as Prime Minister, promising a government of service, promising to restore trust, saying, I will fight until you believe it. Interesting, very